Joe here, just a quick note to say that this recording was done in Steve's office, and you can hear the sounds of some of Steve's creaky chairs behind the dialogue. I hope it doesn't detract from your enjoyment of the podcast. Well, welcome everybody to our final podcast of the year. And what we thought we'd do, we'd take a break from our usual format and have a bit of a review of all the things that have happened over the year. This is a really difficult one to try to cram into a 30-minute podcast, just because there's so much to talk about. So it's only going to be the highlights. So if there's a particular reserve or a particular project that you're involved in that I don't mention, I apologise now, because we really can't fit everything in. So this afternoon I'm joined by somebody who's been on the podcast before. That's Steve Trotter, our CEO.
Afternoon, Joe.
Welcome,
Hello,
Steve.
how are you doing?
And we're also joined by Hazel Jones. Now, Hazel's been at the Trust for a long time, and she is part of what I like to think of as the powerhouse of the Trust. Hazel is one of our fundraisers, and without our fundraisers and the wonderful, wonderful work that they do behind the scenes, we wouldn't be able to do all this great conservation work. And like I said, Hazel's been at the Trust for a long, long time. You've been here longer than me, haven't you?
23 years.
Wow. So Hazel knows everything that goes on, but doesn't necessarily get to the accolades. And the rest of the funding team and the development team don't necessarily get the accolades that they deserve from all their hard work. So
Thanks,
welcome,
Joe. Nice
Hazel.
to see you.
Yeah, excellent. So we can't not start without mentioning Skiddaw, because it is by far and away the biggest thing that's happened to the Trust, possibly in the Trust's lifetime, but definitely over this past year. And part of the whole thing that made Skiddaw happen was that funding, wasn't it, Hazel?
Yeah, so all this started when we were approached by Aviva with a view to buying Skiddaw Forest. And this is a new type of funding for us, so it's what's called green finance. And they wanted to invest the majority of the money, which meant that we thought the small amount of money that was left, 1.25 million, sounds small compared to the whole cost of the land, but it was still a massive task for us. So
Yeah, it was, and it was quite incredible, wasn't it? Because we had the initial money, we got a loan to buy the rest of the land, and we needed to raise the 1.25 million. We had 2 years to raise this money to pay back for this last bit of land.
yeah, we did, and 2 years seemed like doable. We thought, yeah, we can manage that. So we launched the appeal at the beginning of September, initially with our members, but we got lots of national press coverage as well, which was great news. And then unbelievably, we had donations from around 7,000 people, and we hit that target in 6 weeks, which was absolutely phenomenal.
Who were they?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, Joe. I mean, we were absolutely overwhelmed by the support and very grateful for everybody who gave. And when we started to see the donations come in on the website, lots of people were leaving comments with their donation, which I think I probably read all 7,000 of them as the weeks went by. And yeah, it was absolutely riveting reading. And people came from all over the world. So obviously some people were already our supporters, but many people weren't. And many people actually had never even been to Cumbria. Lots of people wanted to give in memory of loved ones, some here and some not. Lots of people had connections to Cumbria in their childhood, and some people had just literally heard about it in the national press and thought, what a brilliant project, and just really wanted to muck in and help. So yeah, we had donations from as little as £2 up into the thousands, and we really are grateful for each and every one of them.
That's utterly incredible, isn't it? I mean, like, you've run a lot of appeals over your time.
Yes.
And that's got to be by far and away the best.
Yeah, it was off the scale.
Absolutely brilliant. And Steve, it's hard to express how important this purchase and this new nature reserve is in terms of the Trust and our work, but in terms of conservation and nature recovery in Cumbria.
Very, very much so. It is a really big deal. And I mean, first of all, to follow on from what Hazel said, we've been absolutely overwhelmed by and humbled by the strength of the support that we've had. Not only have these 7,000 people contributed to the appeal, but we've had the most amazing messages of support. So it's really, really inspiring that we, working on behalf of so many people that care so passionately about Skiddaw Forest and the Northern Lake District, and that we're doing things that people really want to see happen. And it's about putting wildlife back into a landscape that could be far better. There are elements of it which are quite good already. There are some good peat bogs there, and there's some breeding merlins and things like that, but it could be so much better. And we know that the Lake District is missing so much of the wildlife that should be here. This is our big chance to really demonstrate and actually put back the wildlife and the habitats that are missing and create a much more diverse and rich place for wildlife and for people. What's also really exciting is that we're going to be joining up with some of the big landscape scale projects across the northern fells. So we're going to create this northern arc of fells with our partners. So we'll be linking Wild Haweswater that listeners may have heard about, which is United Utilities and RSPB, Icot Hill, which is where Joe and his team have done some amazing work just below Blencathra. Then we move on to Skiddaw, so Skiddaw Forest and a wild Skiddaw Forest, and then linking up with places like Thirlmere, where we're working with United Utilities and the John Muir Trust, and Wild Ennerdale, where obviously the well-known programme with the National Trust and Forestry Commission and United Utilities is underway. So it's putting wildlife back into this landscape and connecting up all the dots, so we get a bigger, better, more joined up approach to putting nature recovery at the heart of the fells and the northern fells.
Yeah, and obviously we've not been resting on our laurels since we've made these fantastic appeal and all the rest of it and done so well. So we've got a new project manager going to be starting in the new year, which is absolutely superb, going to be driving this project forward. And we've had Izzy, who's our tree growing person, has been recruiting volunteers. Again, an amazing response. We got Izzy got 40 tree seed collection volunteers straight away, pretty much, and has got them trained up, and they're going to set about collecting the seed, because we're going to try to grow all our own trees or use partners to grow our trees from locally sourced seed that we can then plant back in there. And you and I, Steve, we had a brilliant visit, did we not, to Haverigg Prison, and hopefully Haverigg is going to become a partner in growing those trees from the seed that we collect.
Yeah, along with several other partners as well, who we're still in negotiations with, so we can't name them yet, but that's on the way. Yeah,
and then on the other thing that's been happening is the baselining. So I've been kind of beavering away, trying to get people together so that once the restoration starts in earnest, we've got this baseline to work from, so that we can see how the efforts that we are making change. Whether it's the water, whether it's the wildlife, whether we're bringing new wildlife in. And last week I was out with a team from Cambridge University. They were taking peat cores to do paleoecological research, so basically looking down at the fossilised evidence within the peat cores, pollen, wood, charcoal, looking at the carbon, and from that they can tell us about human use, about land use, about climate, and about the species that were there in the past. So hopefully that's going to be able to educate us in the kind of things that we want to try to reintroduce. We could spend the rest of the podcast talking about Skiddaw, but we've got loads and loads of other things to talk about. So hopefully that's given everybody a bit of an idea as to what's happening, where we are and where we're going next with Skiddaw. There has been lots of great things going on other nature reserves as well, and one of the big restoration projects that's been happening over the autumn and will be happening over the rest of the winter is at Burnsbeck Moss, where we've been re-wiggling the beck and using that re-wiggling as a way of re-wetting the peat on the bog. And we've done stuff in the past, put a load of dams in. We thought we'd finished, but the bog wasn't getting wet enough. So we've launched into this new remedial work, which we obviously needed the funding for, Hazel.
Yeah, well, we managed to secure grants from National Highways through their Network for Nature programme, so that's really good. We've benefited from a few grants from them, so we've been very grateful to them, and Burnsbeck Moss was one of them.
And Burnsbeck Moss, I took the team, the reserves team. We had our team meeting on Monday and we went for a visit to Burnsbeck Moss, and it does look a bit of a mess at the moment. But this always happens when you're dealing with wet sites in the winter, where you have to deal with them when the birds aren't breeding, and it does look a bit of a mess at the moment. and it is closed at the moment, but come springtime it's going to be open, and I'm sure it's going to be looking absolutely wonderful for the work that's been done. But it's really interesting you mentioning Network for Nature having funded grassland projects and peatland projects, because I wanted to move on to that, because a lot of what we've talked about in the podcasts over the past few months, we've talked quite a lot about what we do on our own nature reserves, but we do so much more than that, don't we? We do so much more through these projects, especially the grasslands and the peatlands, on other people's land.
I have a stat for you if you can
Go
bear
on,
it.
yeah.
But our teams work on roughly 3,730 hectares of other people's land beyond our boundaries. So
Wow.
that's nearly as much work on other people's land as we have on our own.
Yeah.
So it's really important, because nature doesn't recognise boundaries. We can't look after the whole of Cumbria. So working with and influencing working with farmers and influencing other landowners is really important if we're going to deliver nature recovery across the county. And that involves all sorts of work. It includes the peatland team, who do hundreds, if not thousands, of hectares of peat restoration a year. But as you mentioned, critically, our grassland and pollinator team, who do brilliant work in putting flowers and habitats back into the landscape.
Absolutely, yeah.
They're not only out at the sharp end doing surveys and working with people to design and work up new projects, but we also have a team based at Gosling Sike growing plants, so growing wildflowers to plant out into the sites when we've identified them. So they were even featured on Countryfile this year. So we had our plug plants being planted out on sites around Cumbria. So they're all grown in polytunnels up at Gosling Sike near Carlisle, and we have a team of brilliant volunteer gardeners, 20-30 gardeners, plus a small team of professionals under the stewardship of Adam McGinley, and they're growing between 50 and 80,000 plug plants a year to go out into the field.
And it means we're able to supply our own locally sourced plants grown from locally sourced seed back into the countryside.
Can I add a really boring stat again?
Of course you can.
Last year we planted 51,915 plug plants grown from our nursery.
Wow, did they count them all?
Yes.
And what I wanted to say was that both with the grassland side of things, especially with the hay meadow restoration, but also with the peatlands, we are very much at the cutting edge, aren't we, of doing this. And we're going to be able to use that expertise again on Skiddaw, aren't we? Looking at the peat restoration up there, but also looking at the potential grassland restoration around Skiddaw House, putting the flowers back into the countryside.
There's one particular one I'm looking forward to up there, which is the so-called bilberry bumblebee, which is this beautiful bumblebee with a big red backside. So I'm hoping, once the team gets stuck into that restoration project around Skiddaw House, we're going to see a recovery of those kind of invertebrates. Because, I think this year, I don't know about you, Joe and Hazel, but this and last year have been the years when the climate emergency has really hit home. So we really are now seeing impacts on invertebrates in particular. So there's a real worry about, whether it's butterflies, which have had a disastrous year this year, or bees. The changes in the seasonality of our weather patterns are now really hitting home. So these issues are not something in the far distant future, in a decade or two's time. It's happening now. So this work has never been more urgent or critical.
Yeah. So some of the wildlife highlights of the year. Obviously, our ospreys are brilliant for the trust. A brilliant way of getting people involved, and they produced another 2 chicks this year, didn't they? So they've had 29 chicks over the past 11 years. I think 29 chicks. Who'd have thought 29 chicks fledged in on Foulshore, on our nest? There's 10 or 12 nests around the county now. But Hazel, how important have the ospreys been in getting our word out there and getting people interested in nature conservation?
Yeah, hugely important. It's an iconic species. People want to come and see it. So in terms of getting people to come along to Foulshore, or even just to visit your website and engage with it, they were hugely important during lockdown. Having those webcams on the nest, when people couldn't get out into nature, directly. They could, lots of people wrote in and said that they were just sitting there riveted looking at the cameras, and it was really giving them that connection to nature that they were missing out on. So yeah, hugely important. But it's not just about the ospreys, is it, at Falshaw? There's loads of really good species there, whether it's from dragonflies or other birds that are there as well. So it's a stepping stone. You can bring people in with the ospreys, but you can then use it as an opportunity to chat about other things as well.
And now it looks like we might have another osprey nest. So there's another pair of ospreys have started to build a nest much nearer to the car park. So potentially next year we're going to have 2 accessible...
There's something about not counting your chickens before the patch.
Yeah, absolutely. But you never know. We could quite easily have 2 osprey nests on Falshaw, both of which are going to be accessible to the public. We just worry about our car parking then and getting everybody in. And the other great thing on Falshaw as well, because there was some volunteers who noticed that hobbies, which is one of our very small falcon species, a species that actually feeds on dragonflies on the wing. So they pick dragonflies up off the wing and they chase house martins and swallows and hirundines as well.
Quite fearsome predators, actually.
Quite fearsome for such a dainty little bird. And they noticed that this pair of hobbies had stuck around, and eventually they found the nest. So we had the first confirmed breeding of hobby in Cumbria, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And I've been wondering about this for quite a while, because hobbies are seen during the summer, but nobody's ever proved breeding before. So because of all the restoration work we've done, it's absolutely heaves with dragonflies. Let's hope they don't eat all the rare white-faced darter that we reintroduced onto the site. Of course they won't.
Just as well, because at the other end of the year we had a winter visitor up at Gosling Sike where we had a bittern took up residence in some of the wetland restoration areas. It stayed all winter.
Yeah.
So summer visitors to Falshaw and winter visitors
that
to
very much excited
Gosling Sike.
The birding community in Carlisle, didn't it? And one of the other wildlife highlights for this year was we had the 10th year of successful seal pupping down at South Walney, which is brilliant.
It is fantastic.
Yeah.
Although slightly marred by the issues that the team down there have had about disturbance.
Yeah. I heard lately as well that they think there is an over macho male that has been killing some of the pups as well. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
okay.
Sorry. So like it is the 10th year of seal pupping, but it hasn't been the most successful year of getting the pups away.
I remember being in some of the first seal surveys, probably going back 15 or more years now, and we went over to Falney Island, used a telescope and looked back towards the beaches of South Walney, and I remember on that day we counted 200 and we were really excited. It was the most that had ever been counted, and then now we're in the sort of 500s, and it's obviously just due to the protection that we're providing at that nature reserve, reducing the disturbance on the beaches.
Absolutely, yeah. I wholeheartedly think that that's the only reason, it's because of the policing down there and keeping people off the beaches. Another Cumbrian highlight, not necessarily on one of our nature reserves, but Cumbrian highlight from this year was the first beaver kits being born to the beavers on the Lowther estate. We covered this in the podcast last time, but again, they are enclosed beavers and they're in a fenced off area, but it's still the start, isn't it, for getting beavers back into the countryside and doing that wonderful habitat engineering that they do.
Definitely, and I was lucky enough to get it back a few months ago to go up and see the enclosure, and it's amazing what the beavers have done there. They've created ponds like we can't. It's just astonishing, the engineering feats that they can just do instinctively, and the site is looking brilliant. Obviously didn't get to see the kids because we were there in the daytime, but seeing the footage is just a delight. And what we need now is for the government to allow the fences to come down across the country so that we can get beavers back as a genuinely wild species, which they are across our landscapes, where they can be doing good things for wildlife, they could do good things for cleaning up the water, reducing flooding, and as long as we manage what potential impacts there are, which we will and can. We know this because we've done it all in Devon, or our colleagues in Devon Wildlife Trust have done this. There's absolutely the benefits and the wonder of having beavers back in our landscapes far outweigh any potential issues. So we need the government to make a decision, get those fences down.
We do. We want beavers all over the county, and like you say, all of those great benefits but it just increases biodiversity so phenomenally.
I was there. Sorry, I was there on a late autumn cold day, and having walked through the part of the landscape, everything completely dead. Get to the beaver site, it's full of insects, full of winter moths, winter gnats, birds everywhere. Flocks of all sorts of things from starlings through to linnets and lesser redpolls. Yeah. So the whole place felt alive, and it's what they drive. Yeah,
ecosystem engineers. And the other thing we mentioned in the last podcast was red squirrels. And as we all know, red squirrels have had this awful time over the past 50 years, and are still clinging on within these very small enclaves within Cumbria, thanks to the wonderful work of the red squirrel groups. But then I mentioned last time about the reintroduction of pine martins that has gone on down at Grisdale, and I really do think, going from the evidence that we've got from Ireland, that this could be the silver bullet that could really mark a sea change in red squirrel conservation.
And as well as the 13 that have been released in the south of the county, we've been working with a team of volunteers and landowners to install den boxes in the north of the county, because there are pine martins moving down from the north, from the borders, from the Galloway Forest, and also from Kielder. And for quite some years we've been picking up pine martins on cameras. So they are, hopefully we're going to encourage them to naturally recolonise the north of the county and to move down, and along with potentially fertility control for greys, which is a few years off yet. It's potentially the only real solution, because the reproductive and dispersal powers of greys are such that they're just overwhelming the populations of reds that we've still got left, and we're hanging on to those populations, but it's unless we get assistance from these natural sources, whether it's fertility control or from natural predators like pine martins and other things, we're going to be struggling. I don't want to sound melodramatic, but unless we sort this in the next 5-10 years, we could lose our red squirrels.
Totally, but I do think that this introduction of pine martins is going to make a massive difference, and it'll be really interesting to see how this goes.
Yeah, and Josh is doing a great job there, isn't he? And again, his position wouldn't have been made possible if we didn't have some funding for it. Absolutely. And the funding for Josh has come from Cumberland Building Society and Lakeland Limited, two local Cumbrian firms. So big thanks to them as well.
So I'm always going on about the fact that we can't do what we do without our volunteers, and getting people involved and getting the community involved is a massive part of everything that we do. And we've got some great examples of people getting involved, haven't we? One of the things that struck me this year was the Gosling Sike's just been a wonderful place. This is our headquarters, based in the north of the county, just outside of Carlisle. And where, as Steve said earlier, where we've got this brilliant growing venture going on with Adam McGinley. But we've also got these beautiful community gardens, the community wetland where the bittern turned up, and volunteers are absolutely integral to everything that they do up there. And they actually won six Cumbria in Bloom awards this year.
It's a real tribute to all the hard work and the outcomes that they produce up there, which is amazing. Not only the gardens, as you say, which are enjoyed by many hundreds, if not thousands, of people who live locally, but they're a great demonstration for how to do wildlife gardening. And we've got all sorts of little groups working in other ways as well. So we've got a group of hedgehog volunteers who do an amazing job with the hedgehogs. So the gardens are attracting loads of hedgehogs at the moment, and I have been for a year or so. And they're just doing amazing stuff in terms of feeding them and building hedgehog boxes.
There are lots of hedgehog houses out there.
Just looking around the back, and there was a hedgehog wandering down the path towards me in the middle of the day. So I just stood to one side and it trundled past me off to this box.
They've got cameras everywhere, haven't they? Yeah. And then the men's shed fellas who have their workshop there, and they meet on a Friday. They build all these hedgehog houses, don't they?
Yeah, and all sorts of other swift boxes and things. And it's been so successful that we're now they're setting up a women's shed, and then there's a composting group. It's just really exciting, and lots of things happening. It's just great.
Yeah, and so many volunteers are involved in the seed and the horticulture side of things. Yeah. So we're going to be adding more growing areas, and Adam's really keen to move into growing some of the trees and specialising possibly in some of the rare things that we want to try to use within the Skiddaw Restoration Project.
Yeah, we've just secured a grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to do exactly that, work on those really rare species that are difficult to establish. You know, when you're doing your hay meadow restoration, you're taking large swathes of seed, you're either brush harvesting it or taking the green hay and spreading it on the new sites. And, you know, the easy to establish species, they come and they keep coming back year on year. But where they're very rare in the first place, you know, they just don't take because there's so few of them. So we need to give them a little bit of a helping hand. So yeah, Adam and his team are going to be working on collecting those seeds and then growing them on in the nursery with the volunteers. You know, and we've got the seed bank there in conjunction with Kew now, which so we can take those seeds. We've got cleaning facilities, drying facilities, storage facilities. Some of them, the seeds going back to Kew for them to store. You know, we're storing some so that we can use it. And also we're just growing some on straight away so we can put it straight back into the landscape. So yeah, absolutely exciting. And it's so accessible to people. You know, volunteers from all walks of life are coming down and helping out there. And it's just a really great way to get people involved. And we've got one volunteer down there, Rhiannon, who is doing a cycling challenge for us this year. She's going to cycle 4,500 miles and she's raised £3,600 for us already, and you know, hopefully she'll get to her target by the end of this year, so that's really exciting.
That's brilliant, isn't it? And there are other people who do these challenges and raise money on our behalf, aren't there?
Yeah, we just had somebody, Stella, wanted to do a no cake in October challenge. But yeah, so she's been fundraising specifically for Skiddaw. One of our members of the marketing team, Matt, he's doing a running challenge. So he's doing all the famous runs around Cumbria before Christmas. So yeah, he's fundraising as well. So yeah, great ways. People are getting involved in all sorts of different ways.
I thought we could finish by having a think about the future and about what's going to happen next year, but also in a wider idea about the future of nature conservation. Hazel said she's been here for 20, how many years?
23 years. 23
years. I've been here for 20.
Oh yeah, it's coming up 24 in January.
We've been here a long time, and one of the great things about, especially within across the trust, but within my department, within the reserves department, is we've had this brilliant influx of new blood, of new people who want to start with their careers within nature conservation. And we've been running internships and apprenticeships and placements, and it's brilliant. It adds this great excitement and optimism within the team, but it also sets these people up because we have this brilliant track record of, as they leave us, they are then equipped to move into the sector and get further jobs within nature conservation.
Yeah, and I think the marine interns are a classic example of that. I mean, that is a partnership which is funded primarily from the Crown Estate, but we work with Orsted and Natural England and the Marine Management Organisation. And the interns get a real breadth of knowledge from all of those organisations. And then we actually have, and I find this stat unbelievable, 100% success rate for the interns going into a marine conservation job. I love watching their end of internship reviews of their projects. It just gives me goosebumps to see, because they come to you, you know, perhaps, you know, with not so many skills, and then when they get to the end of their internship, obviously they've got skills from their university courses that they're doing, but what we give them is that practical on-the-job experience. They just come out, you know, as they're, in their words, different people.
Yeah. And talking of new projects things, and we've got some really exciting projects kicking off for next year, haven't we, Steve?
There are several around. One of the ones which is really interesting is the seagrass project, which many people have heard about seagrass in other parts of the world, without being aware that we have our own seagrass here in Cumbria off our shores. And we know, for example, that there's a really good seagrass bed just off Barrow. Who would have thunk it, under the water? We've been doing loads of seagrass surveys, so we've now got a really good idea of where seagrass is and where it used to be, and we know that we've lost quite a lot of seagrass in the Barrow area. And the team are now moving on to looking at how we can put some of that back, because seagrass is a wonderful habitat for wildlife, provides all this kind of wonderful shelter for all sorts of species, but it also stores huge amounts of carbon in the mud underneath. So it's a really important habitat and a good indicator of the health of the marine environment. So this year the team have, having done lots of surveys, the team have been out with volunteers and mini surfboards and kind of lying down on the mud flats of Barrow collecting seeds of seagrass. And so they've been collecting huge amounts of seagrass seed and processing it at great length, and we're about to start planting out some of these seagrass beds into the mud flats near Barrow to see whether we can establish new plants and new seagrass beds from scratch. And this is all funded by a really fantastic company called Ozone, who've been sponsoring the work. And it's just really exciting and quite cutting edge stuff. If it all starts to work, which we will find out next spring and next summer, possibly the year after, it opens up all sorts of possibilities for re-establishing the seagrass beds, not only around Barrow but also in the Solway where we think they've been in the past. We're also, it's not just about seagrass, but also the team have been working on salt marshes, particularly around the Solway, where salt marshes are kind of the fringing marginal habitats between the land and the sea. Again, really important for biodiversity there, particularly breeding grounds for lots of birds and overwintering birds as well, particularly. So places like Rockcliffe, up at the Solway, really important areas that depend on these salt marshes. And we're looking to assess the condition of them, to see what we can do to basically help them adapt to climate and coastal change and sea level rise, and hopefully create new areas of salt marsh out front of the existing areas. And they're brilliant for wildlife, brilliant for carbon, but also really important for coastal defence. So like a free way of helping defend the shoreline from storms, which we are seeing increasingly, as we know.
Yeah. Excellent, that's wonderful. So there's loads to look forward to this coming year. It's going to be really exciting. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Hazel.
You're welcome.
It's been a brilliant insight into the beating heart of the trust. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Liz, our wonderful producer who puts all this together. Like I always say, if you like the podcast, give us a like on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. If you've got any ideas for future podcasts, then please send them in to mail@cumbriawildlifetrust.org.uk. And I'd like to give a great shout out and thank you to all our supporters and all our members and everybody who's listened to the podcast this year. If you want to get out, why not visit one of our nature reserves over the holidays and get into nature yourselves and see what wonderful nature reserves we've got. And I hope you all have a wonderful new year.